The city's never stops. 42 floors up, through glass that cost more than most people earn in a year, the streets below move like a current that doesn't know your name and doesn't care. Cars, people, the ordinary momentum of a world with nowhere particular to be. Inside, one man stands at the window, still, watching nothing, holding an envelope he hasn't opened yet. Pull back, and the office is everything you'd expect.
Clean lines, controlled light, the architecture of a man who decided exactly what kind of person he is and built a room to confirm it. Move closer.
Hand is tight on the envelope. Closer still. Return address. 2 words. A name. He sets it down, walks away, comes back. Outside, somewhere in the city below, on a curb in front of a restaurant with a 6-week waiting list, a woman sits alone. No bag, no from worn shoes, paper cup going cold beside her knee. She is not waiting to be rescued. She is waiting for exactly the right person to walk past, and he almost does. William Ashford did not open the envelope right away. He set it on his desk, walked to the window, stood there looking out at the city. 42 floors up, glass and steel and morning light, and told himself it was probably nothing that required immediate attention. Then he walked back, picked it up. Read the name on the return address. Charlotte Harrington. He put it back down. Garrett Phelps, who had been sitting across from him for the past 20 minutes pretending to review quarterly reports, looked up without looking like he was looking up. A skill he had perfected over 15 years of friendship with William Ashford. Useful skill. Necessary even. You going to open it? I already know what it is. Then you already know you need to open it. William said nothing. He picked up the envelope again, set it back down. Garrett watched this happen once before. He stood up, crossed the room and opened it himself. He read it. His face did the thing it did when he was being careful not to react, which meant he was absolutely reacting. It's a wedding invitation. I know. She's marrying Charles Weston. I know. That was fast. 2 years. That's, good for her, I suppose. Efficient. Some people take longer to. Garrett. He stopped. Put the card down on the desk between them. They both looked at it. Cream paper. Gold lettering. The kind of invitation that cost more than most people's car payments. Charlotte had always had good taste. He had admired that once. Now it felt like something being said without words. William turned back to the window. I'm going. Garrett blinked. To the wedding. Yes, you're going to your ex-fiancée's wedding. She invited me. Deliberately. Which means she wants me there. Which means she wants me to see something. He paused. So I'm go, and I'm going to make you see them too. Garrett was quiet for a moment. You don't have anyone to bring. I'm aware. Your last 3 dates lasted a combined total of I'm aware. Garrett. 6 weeks. Which is actually impressive in its own specific way. I will fire you. You've said that 11 times this year. I counted. Garrett sat back down, picked up his pen, and returned to his reports with the calm of a man who knew he would not be fired. The wedding is in 2 weeks. Figure it out. William did not respond, but he stayed at the window, looking out at the city, thinking about Charlotte's face the day she'd handed back his ring. How she hadn't cried, how she'd looked almost relieved, how he'd understood, in the weeks after, that the relief was the thing he couldn't stop turning over. Not the leaving. The relief. He would go to that wedding. He would walk in looking like the man he'd built himself into, which was, by most measurable standards, a formidable man, successful, composed. The kind of person a room noticed when he entered it. He would not walk in alone. He just needed to find someone who could hold their own in a room full of people who had known Charlotte Harrington since prep school. Someone who wouldn't be dazzled or obvious or grateful in a way that showed. He had no idea where to find a person like that. He found her by accident, or more accurately, he almost walked past her. It was a Thursday, 4 days after the invitation arrived. Late afternoon, good weather, and Garrett had been telling him for weeks to stop taking car services for distances under half a mile. So he was walking back from a client meeting 3 blocks from the office, half listening to his own thoughts when he saw her. She was sitting on the curb outside Rafferty's. Rafferty's had a waiting list 6 weeks long and a prix menu that started at $300. The kind of restaurant where the lighting was designed to make everyone look like a better version of themselves. A woman sitting on the outside curb looked wrong there, like a dropped stitch in a very expensive sweater. Her clothes were worn. Her hair was loose and tangled at the ends. She had a paper coffee cup near her knee, the cheap kind, from a corner bodega, and she was looking at something across the street with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who had nowhere to be and was choosing, deliberately, to be exactly here. Not defeated, not pleading, just still. William slowed, he didn't know why. Had passed people on the street, find want in the stack. His city had. You learn to look but without seeing. It wasn't coldness, it was survival, it was the basic thematics of living in proximity to too many strangers. Except he slowed, and then stopped. And then, because he was apparently making a series of unplanned decisions this week, he walked toward her. She looked up before he reached her. Her eyes were gray, the kind of gray that shifts in different light. Cooler in shadow, almost to the substitute in the sun. And the way she looked at him was not the way most people looked at William Ashford when he approached unexpectedly. Most people looked startled or pleased, or both at once. She looked like she was making a decision about him. "You need money," he said, which was not a question and was not his most impressive opening line. In fairness, he hadn't planned to have an opening line. She tilted her head. "Is this a social experiment?" she said. "I answer a certain way, you toss me a coin. I answer another way, you feel good about yourself and walk on." A pause. Hurried. "Which version are you running?" William stared at her. He genuinely could not remember the last time someone had responded to an offer of help by immediately questioning his motives. He was a man who solved problems. People were grateful. People were gracious. People were a great many things. This woman was looking at him like he was mildly interesting and possibly not worth the time. "Neither," he said. "I'm making you a different kind of offer. Men who lead with different kind of offer rarely follow through. Come with me to an event," he said. "One evening. I'll pay you enough to change your situation." She looked at him for a long moment.
Not at his suit or his watch.
At his face.
Like she was reading something specific. Then, change my situation.
Flat, repeating it back. "That's a lot of confidence about a situation you know nothing about." He opened his mouth, closed it. She was right. He'd looked at her for 40 seconds and assumed an entire narrative, which was probably accurate, but the assumption itself, she had found it and pressed on it without raising her voice, without any particular emotion. Just located it and named it. He said. She blinked. Like that genuinely surprised her, like she'd expected him to double down. Small crack in the composure, gone in under a second. But he saw it. "One evening," he said again. "You come with me, you don't have to do anything except be present and speak to people naturally. I handle everything else." "An event," she said. "A wedding? Whose wedding? Someone I used to know." She looked at him steadily. "You want to make your ex jealous?" He said nothing. "That's what this is," she said. "Not a question. You need someone to walk in next to you so you don't look like you care." A pause. "But you do care. Do you want the offers or not?" She was quiet, and then she stood up, slowly, like she was considering the decision not just with her mind but with her whole body. She was taller than he'd expected. She carried herself differently upright than she had sitting on the curb, straighter, more deliberate. Like standing was a choice she made rather than a default. "I'll accept," she said, as if she were granting him something, which was infuriating, actually, faintly, specifically infuriating. "Why?" he asked. Not a question he usually asked. "Because I'm curious," she said simply. "About what?" She held his gaze for one more beat. Something in her expression he couldn't name. "How far a man like you is willing to go," she said. And then she waited, with the patience of someone accustomed to waiting for things that matter, for him to lead the way. He told her his name in the car. She told him hers. Isabella. Just that. Nothing else offered. The salon was on Meridian Street. Not the most exclusive in the city, but close enough. Appointments booked 6 weeks out, stylists with clients who flew in from other states. William had called ahead. They were ready when the car arrived. Isabella stepped out and walked in like she'd been there before. Not nervousness, not wonder, not the faint overwhelm most people showed when they entered spaces built specifically to signal expense. She walked in, looked around once, a brief, comprehensive scan, and sat down in the styling chine chair with the ease of someone settling into a familiar seat, which stopped William mid-step. The head stylist, a precise woman named Diane, approached with the careful brightness of someone professionally equipped to handle all kinds of situations. "What are we thinking today?" Isabella said, without hesitation. "Wave, not curl. Keep the length. Nothing architectural. Soft lines work better with my face shape." She touched the ends of her hair briefly, assessing. "For color, stay close to my base, just richer, and the last inch needs to come off. Diane blinked, then nodded, professionally. William stood very still. Isabella had just described exactly what her hair needed, the way someone gives directions to their own house. Not performance, not lucky guessing. It was knowledge, the specific, practiced knowledge of someone who had sat in chairs like this before. Many times. Someone who had been taught or had learned through repetition precisely what worked for her face, her hair, her coloring. Someone who had once been full to afford knowing. Diane glanced at William briefly. He stepped back toward the waiting area without being asked. He sat down, told himself he was answering emails. He was not answering emails. He was trying to arrange what he'd observed into something coherent. He had found this woman sitting on a curb outside a restaurant. No bag, no phone visible, worn clothing, paper cup from a bodega. He had checked quickly, discreetly, the way he checked things, and she wasn't carrying anything beyond what she was wearing. And she had just told a professional stylist exactly how to cut and color her hair. Not guessed.
Told. The Cetis transformation took 3 hours. He read 2 contracts, approved 1 proposal, and thought about that question 4 more times than was strictly useful.
When Diane came to get him, he walked back into the main salon and stopped. It wasn't that she looked beautiful. She did. The stylist had done excellent work, and the dress his assistant had arranged, navy and clean-lined, was exactly right for the event. What stopped him was something else. She looked exactly like herself, more precisely herself. Like the worn clothes and the curb and the depot cup had been circumstances reducing her to a smaller version. And this was the full size. Not a transformation, a restoration. She looked at him when he came in. Not self-consciously. Not waiting for his approval. She was doing her own assessment of whether he was going to be useful, whether this had been the right calculation. Well, she said. Ready, he said. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Almost amusement. That's not what you were going to say. It's what I'm saying. She picked up the small clutch his assistant had sent over and held it the way someone holds something they've held 1,000 times, without thinking about it. Tell me about the wedding, she said. Charlotte Harrington and Charles Weston. Old money on both sides.
Her family's been in finance for 3 generations.
His family owns a shipping stake and a vineyard upstate that nobody in the family actually manages. And you were engaged to her 2 years ago. She ended it. Not a question. She'd read it from something, his posture probably, or the fact that he was attending the wedding at all instead of polite regrets. Yes, he said, and you've been waiting for a way to respond. I don't wait, and yet here we are. She looked at him evenly. 2 years later. With a plan involving a stranger from a curb. He didn't answer. She nodded slowly. Something confirmed. I'm not going to make you look pathetic, she said. Not reassurance. Just assessment about what she was and was not willing to be part of. That's not something I do. A pause. But I'll give you this one evening. And I'll make sure it counts. He believed her. He wasn't sure why, given that he'd known her for approximately 4 hours. But something in the certainty of her voice. Not bravado, not performance. Just the flat factual certainty of someone who knows what they're capable of. Made the question of belief feel beside the point. The car came. They got in. Isabella looked out the window at the city passing and said nothing for the entire ride. Not because she was nervous. He understood that now, watching her in profile, the way her eyes moved, tracking things, filing them. She was quiet the way people are quiet when they're thinking. When you want pieces around a board. He had the unsettling feeling that the board she was playing on was not the same one he thought they were sharing. The Harrington Weston wedding was held at the Aldermore. The kind of venue that had accumulated significance over decades until the building itself felt like a statement. High ceiling. Chandeliers that had been there since before William's father was born. A guest list that read like a directory of people who had never needed to check a price before making a decision. William had attended events here many times. He knew how to move through this room, which conversations to enter, which to observe, how to make his presence feel like it had always been there. He walked in with Isabella, and the room shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once. More like a current, a subtle realignment of attention. A space adjusts, something unexpected enters it, and the existing occupants aren't sure yet what category to put it in. Heads turned. Not obviously, just turned. Isabella didn't react. She looked at the room once, the same brief comprehensive scan she'd given the salon, and then she was moving through it. steady, unhurried, like the weight of attention was something she'd learned a long time ago to carry without noticing. They hadn't been near the 4 minutes before Renaud Villiers appeared. William knew him by reputation, French investor, international portfolio. The kind of man who showed up at events like this because people like Charlotte cultivated people like him deliberately, useful, impressive, decorative in the right ways. He came toward them, and William assumed he was approaching William. Then he watched Renaud's attention shift, settle, land on Isabella, and stay there. With the particular form of someone who was spotted unexpectedly, a person they were not prepared to see tonight. Not romantic interest, something more specific than that. Something that looked, briefly, like the careful neutrality of two people who have agreed in advance not to acknowledge each other in public. Enjoying the evening? Renaud said, addressing them both, but pitched toward her. It's early yet, Isabella said. Indeed, he extended a hand, a formal introduction to the room's benefit. Renaud Villiers, Isabella, first name, nothing else, playing the stranger, and she played it well, completely. No flicker of recognition in her face, no micro-adjustment in her posture. She received his handshake and his name like someone receiving a stranger's, and if William hadn't been watching, if he hadn't been watching her specifically, looking for exactly this, he would have believed it entirely. But he had been watching. So he caught it. The slight emphasis she put on the word indeed when she repeated it back, testing whether Renaud would catch the echo. He did. His eyes moved to hers for 1/4 second. That was all. They knew each other. They were performing not knowing each other, and they were doing it well enough that everyone else in the room would see two strangers meeting at a party. You follow the markets? Renaud said. When they're interesting. And are they interesting at the moment? AI infrastructure is. Everything else is waiting to see what AI does to everything else. She picked up a glass from a passing tray without glancing at it. It's a strange time to buy cautious and equally strange not to be. Renaud looked at her with the expression of a man recalculating. That's rather precisely put, he said. It's fairly obvious if you're watching the right indicators. Beaumont Capital shifted allocation in Q2, he said, a test, seeing Sushi tracked. They announced that in February, Isabella said. The more interesting question is why Hollander Group moved first before the announcement. She took a sip, unless that was the point. A short silence. The kind that happens when a conversation reaches an unexpected depth and the room around it hasn't noticed yet. Indeed, Renaud said again, but differently this time, the word doing more work. William Sims set his glass down very carefully on a nearby surface. He had a degree from Wharton. He ran a company with 9 figures in annual revenue. He had moved through rooms like this his entire adult life. And Isabella, who he had found on a curb outside a restaurant this afternoon, had just dismantled a sophisticated market observation in front of one of the most experienced investors in the room, without leaning forward, without performing. Like it was the obvious thing to say. He needed to know who she was. He was going to find out. But first, Charlotte Harrington appeared. She had always known how to enter a room, how to time it. The angle, the pace, the way she made the deliberate seem unconsidered. She looked exactly as expected. The dress, the poise, the smile calibrated to the occasion. Her eyes found William, then found Isabella. Something happened in Charlotte's face, fast, controlled, almost imperceptible. Gone before anyone without cause to look for it would have noticed. She moved toward them with the smooth confidence of a woman in her own carefully constructed space. William. The voice was warm in the way of someone who has decided on the temperature in advance. You came, you invited me. A brief pause. Acknowledged without being acknowledged. You brought company. She turned to Isabella, extended her hand. I don't think we've been introduced. I'm Charlotte. Isabella, no surname, no explanation. Charlotte shook her hand. And in the half-second of that handshake, something passed between them that William couldn't fully read from where he stood. Not just recognition. Something older than that. Something with weight. Charlotte's smile didn't change, but her eyes did. Just slightly, just enough. You look familiar, Charlotte said. Light, conversational, the tone of a woman trying to place a face at a party she's thrown for 300 people. Isabella tilted her head. Do I? Not a question. A deflection so smooth it barely registered as one. I feel like we might have crossed paths, Charlotte pressed. Still pleasant, still warms on the surface, but pressing. The world has a way of being smaller than it appears, Isabella said, with a smile that matched Charlotte's in temperature and revealed exactly as much. 3 seconds of silence. Charlotte held her composure absolutely. You had to credit her for that. I hope you both enjoy the evening, Charlotte said finally. She touched William's arm as she turned, a gesture that communicated a dozen things, none of them generous, and moved back into her room, her wedding, her perfectly constructed world. William watched her go, then he looked at Isabella. What did you say to her? He said quietly. Before I was close enough to hear. I said I hoped she'd be very happy. A pause, and that I'd once been engaged myself. That it didn't work out because my fiancé decided I wasn't quite right for his family. William went still. That was precise, deliberate. A message designed to land exactly where it landed. A woman who had once decided, for reasons she never explained, that William Ashford was not quite right for her life either. A reflection, delivered with a smile.
That was calculated, he said. Was it? She looked at him, serene, entirely untroubled. He almost laughed, actually almost, which was surprised him.
Shall we dance, she said, or would you prefer to stand here and watch her try to figure out where she knows me from? Let's dance, he said. She danced the way she did everything else. Like the muscle memory was already there, waiting for an occasion to use it. He led. She followed, but in the way of someone making a deliberate choice to follow rather than simply deferring. There was a distinction there. He felt it. You've been in rooms like this before, he said. Not a question. Recently? No. But before. Before, she agreed. He tried a different approach. The market analysis, he said.
With Villiers, that wasn't casual knowledge. It wasn't complicated knowledge either. Isabella.
He said her name like a request, watching her face. Where did you come from? She looked up at him. The chandelier light hit something in her gray eyes. Not tiredness exactly, but the presence of something that had been carried for a long time. Does it matter? She said. It's starting to. She held his gaze. 1 beat. 2. Then something in her expression, not softening exactly, more like a decision being made about how much to give and what to hold back. I've been in this world, she said, and then circumstances made me leave it. And now I'm in it again for 1 evening, because a man who needed something found me at the right moment. She paused. That's the version I can give you tonight. He could have pushed. He generally pushed when he wanted something, pressing until the information came, please. He didn't push. Something about the way she said it. Not evasive, not performed, just exact in its incompleteness, made pressing feel like the wrong instrument. They finished the dance. The orchestra shifted tempo. He kept his hand her back and they turned together, and across the room he watched Charlotte watching them with the careful attention of someone trying to look like she isn't watching. Good. That was the plan. Except somewhere between the curb and this moment, the plan had become a secondary concern. Charlotte found him on the balcony 20 minutes later. He'd needed air. She came out quietly and closed the door behind her. The city spread below them, all that light that never stopped, indifferent and enormous. She's remarkable, Charlotte said, flatly, yes. Where did you find her? Does it matter? Her jaw tightened, small, controlled. She's not from your usual circles. My circles have expanded. William. She turned to face him fully. The performance was thinner out here without 300 people watching. She knew things in there about markets, about specific transactions that isn't cocktail party knowledge. She's knowledgeable.
Yes.
Who is she? He was quiet. My God. Charlotte's voice dropped. Slower. The voice of someone assembling something. You don't actually know. He said nothing, which was confirmation enough. She let out a short breath, not quite a laugh. You found her somewhere, and you brought her here, and you don't even know who she is. You know nothing, William. She stepped closer, urgent now. That woman did not walk into your life by accident. People like her don't simply appear in the right dress, at the right event, knowing exactly the right things. She paused. Be careful. He looked at her for a long moment. That's an interesting concern, he said finally, coming from you. Something crossed her face, the closest thing to discomfort he'd ever seen on Charlotte Harrington. Then she straightened. Composure returned, perfect. Enjoy the rest of the evening, she said, and walked back inside. He stood alone with the city, thinking. Charlotte was right about one thing. He didn't know who Isabella was. He had the faint outline, the way she held a room, the knowledge she hadn't explained, the ease in a styling chair, the way she and Renaud Villiers had performed not knowing each other for an audience of 300 people. That last part. Specifically, he needed everything. The drive home was quiet. Isabella looked out the window at the city moving past. Lit windows, wet pavement, the slow, red pulse of traffic at intersections. She looked at all of it with the same measuring attention she gave everything else. Charlotte warned you about me, she said without turning from the glass. He didn't ask how she knew. She did, he said. What did she say? That you didn't appear by accident. Isabella was quiet for a moment. Then she turned and looked. Her face in the shifting of the car, streetlights crossing it in intervals, was very still. And what think? She said. I think I'm going to find out. She held his gaze for another moment, then turned back to the window. I know, she said simply. He dropped her at the hotel, watched her walk through the entrance without looking back. The way she moved, straight, deliberate, like someone who had gotten used to the specific weight of what they carried, had stopped not noticing it only because they'd been carrying it so long. He sat in the car after she was gone. Then he picked up his phone. It's Ashford, he said when Silas picked up. I need you to find someone. First name Isabella, early 30s. She was at the Aldermore tonight. I want to know who she is, where she came from, and what she was doing sitting on the curb outside Rafferty's at 5 o'clock this afternoon. He paused. Everything, Silas. He hung up. Outside the hotel, a light came on in one of the upper floors. He couldn't be certain it was hers. He looked at it anyway. 3 floors up, Isabella sat on the edge of the bed in her coat. She hadn't taken it off yet. The evening had gone exactly as she'd planned. Better, in some ways. Charlotte's face when they'd shaken hands, that single crack in the coach of a woman who never cracked, was worth something. Worth a portion of what the last 4 years had cost her. But there was a but. She hadn't planned on William Ashford being the specific kind of man he was. She'd known his profile before the curb. Known he was useful, that his name opened doors, that his presence in a room changed the room's temperature. That was the calculation. She hadn't planned on the moment at the salon when he'd looked at her with something that wasn't at attraction and wasn't pity and wasn't any of the categories she'd expected. She hadn't planned on the way he hadn't pushed, on the balcony story, when pushing was clearly the thing he would normally do. She hadn't planned on any of that. She pulled the disposable phone from her coat pocket. Typed, he's already investigating. The reply came in 3 minutes. Expected, faster than we thought. What's your next move? She stared at the screen. Typed, still deciding. She deleted both messages, set the phone face down on the nightstand, went to the mirror, looked at herself. The waves Diane had set, the dress, the face that had spent an evening somewhere warm and well lit, rather than 4 years learning how to be invisible. She reached up and carefully removed the small gold earrings, her mother's. She carried them everywhere, always, the one constant in 4 years of deliberately having nothing constant. She held them in her palm, closed her fingers around them, and in the mirror of a hotel room she hadn't expected to be standing in. Her eyes went red. She didn't cry. But she stood there for a long time. But then she put the earrings on the nightstand beside the phone, changed out of the dress with the careful deliberateness of someone who understood, thought some things needed to be treated with care even when no one was watching, and lay down on the bed. She stared at the ceiling. William Ashford was going to investigate her. He was going to find nothing for a while, and then he was going to find something, and then everything was going to accelerate. She had prepared for that. She had prepared for most things. What she hadn't fully prepared for was the possibility that she might not entirely mind being found. She closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come right away. It rarely did these days, but eventually it came. The report came back on a Tuesday, 7 pages. Single-spaced. Worked for William for 6 years, subsidies, and had never once failed to find what William needed found, and who was not a man who felt the need to prepare people for information, had left a voicemail before sending the file, which was unusual. The voicemail said, "You should read this somewhere quiet." William read it at his desk, 42 floors up, which was about as quiet as his life got. He read the first page, then the second. By the third page, he had stopped sitting back in his chair and was leaning forward, both elbows on the desk, the posture of a man being pulled towards something he hadn't decided yet whether he wanted to reach. Isabella Reeves, daughter of Edward Reeves, founder and CEO of Reeves Construction, one of the largest privately held construction firms in the Northeast for nearly 2 decades, municipal contract partnerships with 3 of the largest development groups in the region. A company built over 30 years by a man who had started with nothing and ended up with something worth protecting. Until 2019, the collapse came fast and hit hard. Fraud allegations, falsified contracts, embezzled fund routed through accounts that bore Edward's name. The kind of case that prosecutors build careers on: clean, documented, apparently incontrovertible. Ed Reeves was indicted in March. The trial began in September. He died in November, before the verdict. Heart failure, the report said. Silas had added a handwritten note in the margin, unusual for him, a man of typed precision. It said simply, stress-induced. Medical examiner's phrasing, not mine. William set the pages down, picked them up again. Eleanor reviews. Isabella's mother died 8 months after Edward. The report used 3 words: grief, then illness, which were only technically 2 different things. Isabella had been 28 years old. She'd spent the 4 years since in a version of her life that bore no resemblance to the one she'd been raised in. No fixed address, no financial accounts active, no employment records, no digital footprint of any kind that Silas could locate, nothing that would allow anyone to track her movements or where she was. As if she had chosen deliberately and completely to vanish. As if vanishing had been the plan all along. And then, page 6, the name that made William's hand go still on the paper. Charlotte Harrington. Not peripheral, not incidental, central. The report laid it out in the careful, documented language of a man who understood the weight of what he was committing to paper. Charlotte had entered into a strategic partnership with Reeves Construction in 2017. 2 years of apparent cooperation, joint ventures, shared contracts, the kind of professional intimacy that comes only with genuine trust extended and received. And in those 2 years, according to financials records, Silas obtained through channels William did not ask about, Charlotte had been using that trust to build a trap. Falsified documents carrying Edward's signature on transactions he had no knowledge of. Accounts structured to appear as his. A financial architecture so carefully designed that when it collapsed entirely on him. Only on him. And Charlotte stood outside the wreckage looking like someone who had barely escaped the same disaster through pure fortune. William sat very still for a long time. He had almost married this woman. He had stood across from Charlotte in his family's dining room and shown his mother the ring. He had sat with her at 2 a.m. talking about nothing important and thought, this is what settled feels like. This is the shape of a life. He had almost married a woman who had watched a man die without the chance to defend himself, who had left a 28-year-old woman on the other side of a demolition she'd engineered and walked into her next chapter without a backward look. Sat back down, stood up again, and grabbed his jacket and drove to the hotel. She opened the door on the second knock. Different from the night of the wedding. Simple clothes, hair pulled back loosely, no makeup. And in the half-second before her expression settled into its usual composure, he saw something. Not surprise, not fear, recognition. The particular recognition of someone who has been running the calculation of when a specific moment would arrive and has just watched it arrive on schedule. You found something, she said. Can I come in? Not a question. But he waited. He stepped back. He didn't sit, neither did she. He stood in the center of the room with the report in his hand, and she stood by the window, and the city outside was gray and overcast, and none of that mattered at all. Your father, he said. Edward Reeves. She said nothing. Charlotte was responsible, still nothing. But something changed in her shoulders, wasn't. A fractional shift, like a person who has been bracing against a weight for so long they've forgotten what it feels like to have someone else acknowledge the weight exists. Tell me, he said. Not what Silas found. What he couldn't find. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she went to the small chair by the window and sat. Like staying upright for this part required a decision she was only making it once, and she was making it now. My father trusted her, she said. Her voice was even, practiced even. He wasn't naive. He'd built a company from nothing. He understood how people operated. But Charlotte came in with exactly the right references, a tone, a right understanding of what he'd built and why it mattered to him. A pause. She knew how to be precisely what a specific person needed her to be. I've thought about that a great deal. William knew that quality, better than most. 2 years as his partner, Isabella continued. In that time, she built a parallel structure inside his company. Shell accounts. Forged signatures on documents that were modeled on real ones, close enough to pass initial scrutiny, different enough to do what she needed them to do. When it broke open, there was no visible trace of her involvement, just his name on everything. Her eyes moved to the window. She'd also made sure the media had everything before the legal process could move. Every document, every forged transaction. Someone certain the story was out before my father had a lawyer who understood the full scope of what had been done. She made sure of that, William said. She made sure of that, Isabella confirmed. He thought of Charlotte's face at the wedding. The calibrated warmth. The way she'd come to find him on the balcony. And he understood now what that conversation had actually been. Not concern for him, fear. She had recognized Isabella the moment they shook hands, and she'd needed to understand how much Isabella knew and how close she was. "Why did you disappear?" he said. "Because within a week of my father's death, I knew my movements were being monitored." Her voice remained flat, factual. My apartment, my phone, my email accounts. She needed to know whether I had anything, whether I was a threat. A pause. I wasn't. Not then. I had grief and anger and almost nothing else. "So you may treat yourself nothing to find. I made myself someone who didn't exist in any system she could serve." She looked at him directly. "And I spent 4 years finding what I needed to find, piece by piece. From the outside, with no resources and no access, which is slower than you'd imagine and faster than you'd think possible when you have nothing else to do with your time." The room was very quiet. "You plan to be visible again," he said slowly. "At the right moment. With the right person. I needed to re-enter that world without Charlotte controlling the narrative of my return." She met his gaze without apology. "You were the right person at the right moment. I knew your name. I knew your history with Charlotte. I'd been waiting for the right circumstances for 2 months. And I walked past you. You almost walked past me, the ghost of something at the corner of her mouth. You came back." He looked at her. He should have felt used. He was aware that used was a reasonable response to this information. He had been selected and positioned and deployed. What he actually felt was considerably more complicated than used. "The evidence," he said. "What do you have? Enough to make a credible case." A pause, not enough to make an airtight one. "What's missing?" She hesitated. First real hesitation he'd seen from her. "The original documents," she said. "The contracts Charlotte used as her template before she altered them. The real versions with the real signatures. That prove the altered ones are fabrications. If I can establish that the originals existed and were deliberately changed, the entire structure of what she built collapses." She looked at him. "I know who has them. Tell me." "Margaret Holloway." He knew the name. Peripheral knowledge. Charlotte's lawyer. 12 years. Through 3 major transactions and at least 2 situations where a less careful lawyer would have walked away. Isabella's voice was precise.
Choosing each word. Kept everything. Not out of loyalty, out of intelligence.
She holds the original documents as insurance against the day Charlotte decides that Margaret knows too much and becomes a liability.
You need those documents.
"I need those documents." He nodded. "Processing. I'll find a way to reach her," he said. "I'm not asking you to. I know." He picked up that jacket from the chair where he'd dropped it.
I'm deciding to.
She watched him to move toward the door. Something crossed her face. Not fast this time. Slower. Like something arriving that she'd been expecting. "William." He stopped. "Why?" she said genuinely, not rhetorical. Not testing. Actually asking. He turned, looked at her across the room. "Because what was done to your father was wrong," he said. "And I don't like people who do wrong things without consequence." He held her gaze. "And because I spent 2 years wondering what I'd missed about Charlotte. Now I know. And I'd like to do something useful with that information." He left. Isabella sat in the chair by the window for a long time after the door closed. She thought about her father at the kitchen table. Coffee going cold. Contracts spread around him in the specific disorder of a working man's desk. He used to look up when she came in and say, without preamble, without checking whether she had time, "What do you think about this?" Treating her opinion like it mattered before she had credentials to justify having one. She thought, "I'm close now, Dad." Then she stood up, went to the small desk in the corner, and got back to work. Charlotte moved on a Thursday. Every major paper, every financial news outlet with a readership that overlapped with the world Isabella was trying to re-enter. The story was thorough, sourced, and timed with the precision of someone who had done something like this before because she had. The headline varied by lout, but the substance was the same. Isabella Reeves, daughter of convicted fraudster, returns to high society. Sources suggest she is using association with William Ashford to rehabilitate the Reeves name. There were photographs from the wedding. Someone had been positioned with a camera and had been waiting. William saw the story at 6 in the morning. His phone started ringing at 6:15. Garrett first, I'm seeing something. Tell me you're seeing this. Then the publicist. Then 3 board members who read financial news before 7 and considered this a point of personal distinction. He declined all of it and called Isabella. She picked up on the first ring. I've seen it, she said, level. The voice of someone who had been waiting for a blow and is now assessing how hard it actually landed. Are you all right? I'm fine. Isabella. I'm fine, William. She moved faster than I expected. I thought we had another week. A pause. She's frightened. Yes. Good brief. Certain, and then don't say anything publicly. Not yet. If you respond, you validate the something worth responding to. Wait. We let it sit. My publicist is going to push on hard for state. Tell to wait firm. No qualification. And then we move. A pause. You've thought about all of this, he said. I've thought about everything for 4 years, she said. This specific scenario, what she'd use, when she'd use it, what the correct response was. A pause that lasted 1 beat longer than the others. The correct response is patience. For a little while longer, he believed her, because she had been right about everything so far. Garrett appeared in William's office doorway at 9 that morning, coffee in hand, his expression carefully arranged into something between concern and professional neutrality. So, he said, the woman from the curb. Garrett, I'm not judging. I want to be clear about that. I'm processing. He sat down without being invited. Charlotte destroyed her family. Yes, and she came back with a plan, and the plan involved you. Yes. Garrett was quiet for a moment, drank his coffee, set it down. Do you need anything from me? He said. William looked at him. 15 years. Garrett Phelps, who counted the number of times William said he'd fire him and kept a running tally as a kind of affectionate record. Garrett, who showed up the morning after Charlotte left and sat in William's office for 3 hours talking about nothing important and never mentioned it afterward. Not yet, William said, but stay close. Garrett nodded, picked up his coffee, left without another word, which was exactly right. The Aldermore Foundation annual gala happened every year, regardless of what else was happening. It predated Charlotte's social ascendancy and would outlast it. Neutral ground by default, an event large enough that its existence didn't belong to any one person. Charlotte attended. She chaired a subcommittee and her name was in the program, which made it, under the circumstances, useful. Renaud Villiers was there. William saw him across the room and felt the particular, poorly understood irritation of a man who is trying to decide whether his irritation is reasonable. He was not generally a man who had feelings he couldn't immediately categorize. Renaud found Isabella within 20 minutes of arriving. They stood near the east windows, talking. The body language of people who were comfortable with each other, not the comfortable of 2 people recently introduced, but the older kind. The kind built from accumulated time and shared knowledge of each other's habits. William watched this from across the room, told himself he was not watching, watched with more attention than before. Isabella laughed at something Renaud said, not the social class she deployed in rooms like this. He'd learned to distinguish them over past weeks. This was real, low, brief. The kind that happens when something is actually funny, rather than strategically amusing. William set his glass on a passing tray and crossed the room. He didn't plan it. It was the absence of a plan, which, he would think about this later, was unlike him in a way that should have told him something significant about his current state. Villiers. He arrived at their conversation with the surface calm of a man, pretending he hadn't just crossed a crowded ballroom with no clear agenda. Ashford. Renaud smiled. Easy, entirely unbothered, the equanimity of man with nothing to prove and a nowhere particular to be. I'd need a moment with Isabella. He looked at her, not at Renaud. She looked back at him, reading something in his face with the speed she applied to everything. Her expression shifted through 2 or 3 calculations before she said to Renaud, "Give us a minute." Renaud excused himself with a graciousness that William found additionally, irrationally irritating. That was unnecessary, Isabella said immediately. I wanted to talk about the Holloway situation. That is not what your face said when you walked over here. He opened his mouth, closed it. She was correct. His face had communicated something, and it had not been about Margaret Holloway. And the fact that his face had communicated something without his authorization was a problem. His face was not supposed to operate independently. The original documents, he started. William, his name like a full stop. What is actually happening with you right now? Nothing. You interrupted the conversation I was having with someone I trust to stand here and be visibly. She stopped. Chose the next word carefully, unsettled. I wasn't aware that You were? Not unkind, just accurate. And I need to tell you something about Renaud, because you've clearly constructed a version of this situation that isn't accurate. He waited. He's been helping me, she said. Her voice dropped, not soft, but private. The register she used when something mattered. For the past 2 years. Research I couldn't do from inside the country. Contacts in European financial institutions. Access to records I had no legitimate pathway to reach. She looked at him steadily. He's been part of this longer than you have. He's the reason I had half of what I brought to you. William was quiet, rearranging. Rapidly. Sozinus was not. He had assumed or had allowed himself to assume or had, yes. He had assumed something about Renaud Villiers that was not only incorrect, but had caused him to walk across a ballroom and interrupt conversation with an ally, which made the entire episode more embarrassing rather than less. You could have told me that, he said. You didn't ask. You assumed and acted on the assumption. She held his gaze. That's a pattern worth noticing. He looked at her. You were jealous, she said. Quiet, not triumphant, something more careful than that. I was concerned about William. He stopped talking. She was close, had moved slightly closer without him registering when. Close enough that he was very aware of the specific quality of her attention. The way she looked at him, like she was reading something he'd written and just saying what it meant. Don't cover it, she said quietly. It doesn't suit you. You're too precise for it. He looked at her. The gala continued around them. Music, crystal, the layered conversation of 200 people who had known each other too long. None of it touching this particular few feet of space. I don't know what to do with this, he said. Honest, which was unusual for him in context that felt like this one. Neither do I, she said, unexpectedly, was the most solid thing either of them had said all evening. They ended up outside by a kind of gravitational drift. The conversation moving them toward the side exit without either of them making a decision about it, and then neither of them turning back. The parking structure beneath the Aldermore, gray concrete. Fluorescent lights humming at a frequency just below conscious attention, the most deliberately unromantic setting imaginable, which felt somehow appropriate, like the universe enforcing honesty by removing atmosphere. She's going to escalate, Isabella said. They'd been talking the case. Margaret Holloway, the timeline, the next steps. But underneath all of it, something else running like a current beneath the surface conversation. I know. After the newspaper story didn't land the way she intended, I know. She'll go after the business next, or make it personal in a different way. Something designed to destabilize rather than destroy. We need to move on Holloway before she does. I have a meeting scheduled, he said, Thursday morning. She looked at him. You didn't tell me that. I'm telling you now. A pause. Something in her expression he couldn't fully read, not quite approval, not quite surprise. Something between them that had no clean name. William, he kissed her. Not planned. Not the careful, considered action of a man who planned and considered. Just. The distance between them stopped being a reasonable thing, and then it wasn't there. She went still, 1 second, 2, long enough that he thought he'd made a serious miscalculation, and then she kissed him back, brief, fully real, and then her hands came up and she stepped back. Not far, a step, enough to put air between them. She was breathing. That was differently. So was he. Don't explain it, she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was careful in the specific way of someone maintaining very deliberate hold of something. Don't tell me what it was or wasn't or. She stopped, pressed her lips together, looked away. He watched her. The thing on her face that she was working to keep arranged. He recognized it now. Not coldness, not rejection. Something that looked much more like someone standing at the edge of something they want very much and don't trust themselves to want without losing their footing. I can't, she said. Quiet. Not yet. There's too much stillage motion. And if I let something pull me sideways right now, I'll lose the thread I've been following for 4 years. She steadied, lifted her chin slightly. I need to finish this first. He looked at her for a long moment. Okay, he said. She looked up, like an argument had been prepared and had known to argue against. Okay, she said. You need to finish this first, he said. So we finish it. He held her gaze. and then we figure out the rest. Something moved through her expression, fast, complicated, not entirely suppressed before he saw it. He turned and walked back toward the entrance. He stood in the concrete gray of the parking structure for a moment. The fluorescent hum, the distant sound of the city above. His heart was doing something it hadn't done in a long time. He didn't count back to the last time. There was no productive reason to. He followed her in. Charlotte's next move came 4 days later. Not through the press this time. Direct, Isabella's car parked outside her office building. The driver's side window scratched with something sharp. One word carved into the glass, leave. And a message to her phone from a number that would trace to a dead end. You were smart to disappear once. Do it again before someone makes you. Isabella photographed both, sent them to William without commentary. He called Silas within the hour. Silas delivered a name in 48 hours, Preston Graves. A man who did work for people who needed distance from the work. Connected to Charlotte through 2 deliberate layers of separation. William called Graves directly. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. William was very good at short conversations that communicate exactly what needed to be communicated without requiring additional length. Graves did not contact Isabella again, but the message had been sent by Charlotte and received. She was frightened enough now to act carelessly, which meant they were close enough that she could feel it, which meant it was time. William went to see Margaret Holloway on a Wednesday morning. Her office was in a brownstone on the east side, old neighborhood, old building. The kind of address that communicated competence and discretion through sheer cumulative gravity. Margaret Holloway was 61, sharp-faced. The particular sharpness of someone who had spent 4 decades being underestimated in rooms full of people who should have known better and had arrived at a settled, quiet confidence about it. She looked at him across the desk with the expression of someone who had already determined why he was here before he sat down. Mr. Ashford, Miss Holloway. I assume this isn't about estate planning. No. She folded her hands on the desk, waited with the patience of a woman who charged by the hour and had no reason to rush. You have documents, he said. From 2017 through 2019, original contracts from Reeves Construction. The versions that existed before that were altered. She didn't blink. I can neither confirm nor deny the contents of any files in my possession. You've held them for 6 years, he said, as protection. Against the day Charlotte Harrington decides that someone who knows what you know is more useful as a liability than as a lawyer. He paused. She hasn't turned on you yet, but you have watched her operate long enough to understand that eventually she does. Margaret was very still. Edward Reeves died, William continued, with his name on charges that weren't his. He died before anyone could prove that. He left behind a daughter who spent 4 years with nothing on the street, collecting what she could from the outside because it was the only available move. He let that settle. You have the documents that could have changed that. Mr. Ashford, I'm not to threaten you, he said, level, completely sincere. I'm not here to pressure you into anything. I'm asking you one plain question. A pause. How long do you want to keep holding them? Margaret looked at him. The office was quiet in the way of rooms that have held many difficult conversations. Somewhere outside, at street level, a door closed, the ordinary sound of an ordinary Wednesday. My husband gave me a bronze statue when I passed the bar, she said, slowly, like she was deciding word by word whether to say this. It's on that shelf. He said the law was supposed to be a shelter for people who had no other shelter. She looked at the statue for a moment. I've spent a considerable amount of time over the past 6 years thinking about that. William waited. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk, placed a thick manila envelope on the surface between them. I'll need written confirmation of my cooperation, she said quietly. That this was voluntary, that I came forward. You'll have it before the end of the week. She slid the envelope across the desk. Her hand rested on it for one more sec. Alas, that's 6 years of holding something she should have released sooner. William took the envelope. He drove directly to Isabella's office. She was at her desk when he arrived. The small office on the 3rd floor. The one she'd rented 2 weeks after the newspaper story. The one with the window that looked onto the street rather than an alley, which she'd mentioned once as an improvement she hadn't expected to matter as much as it did. She looked up when he came in. He set the envelope on the desk between them. She looked at it, at him, back at the envelope. She opened it slowly, read the first page. Her hand went flat on the desk, not trembling. Second page. Third. He watched her read and watched the thing happening in her face. The slow, almost disbelieving arrival of something she had worked toward for so long that the physical reality of holding it felt structurally wrong, like a word repeated until it loses meaning. She set the pages down, sat very still. "This is it," she said, barely above a whisper. "The original signatures, the real contracts." A pause, the one she used as the template before she changed it. "You can see the alteration points here and here." She touched 2 spots on the page without pressing, like she was afraid of leaving a mark. "She can't explain these away. There's no version of these documents that doesn't show exactly what she did and exactly when she did it." "No," he agreed. Isabella looked up at him. Her eyes were bright, not crying. Something more controlled than crying, and more honest than composure. "How did you get her to give them up?" she said. I asked her a question she'd been waiting for someone to ask. She looked at him for a long moment, then she picked up her phone. Waited. "This is Isabella Reeves. I have new evidence in the Reeves construction case. Original documentation that establishes the fraud was external and deliberate." A pause. "I need to come in." Another pause. "Tomorrow morning." "Yes." She looked at William across the desk. Steady. "Certain. I'll be there." She hung up. The office was quiet around them, the street out doing its ordinary evening things, a bus, a distant conversation, the particular rhythm of a city that doesn't stop for individual significance. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he said. She looked at the documents laid out on her desk. 4 years of a map, and here was the destination. "My father used to say the truth had its own weight," she said quietly, "that you couldn't bury it without it eventually shifting the ground above it." She looked up. "The ground is shifting," she said. He looked back at her. And neither of them had anything more to add to that, which was fine. Some things are complete without being finished. Some things are just next. The morning of the meeting was grey, not stormy, not dramatic. Just that flat, even grey that settles over a city sometimes and makes everything look like it's holding its breath. Like the light itself can't quite commit to what it wants to do. Isabella stood at the window of her office for a long time before she picked up her bag. She had rehearsed the sequence. The way to present 4 years of work to a room full of people who would need to be convinced not just of the evidence, but of her credibility, of the fact that a woman who had spent 4 years without a fixed address was the most reliable person in the room. She had thought about all of it. What she hadn't thought about was how it would feel to actually walk through the door. Heavy. That was the word, not in a bad way. The heaviness of something that matters. Of a door you've been walking toward for so long that the walking became its own kind of life and you stopped remembering what it would feel like to arrive. She picked up her bag and pushed. The federal prosecutor's office smelled like old paper and recycled air and central heating set slightly too high. A standard government building. The kind of place designed to communicate seriousness without spending money on the aesthetics of seriousness. Prosecutor Diane Calloway was mid-50. No nonsense in the particular way of someone who had encountered every variety of nonsense and run out of patience approximately a decade ago. She looked at Isabella across the conference table, the way a person looks at a structure they're deciding whether to trust with weight. "Mrs. Reeves," she said, "the documents first." So they started with the documents. Isabella laid them out in the order she'd planned. Originals first. The real contracts, Edward's actual signature on them, the version that existed before Charlotte touched them. Then the altered versions, side by side. Then the financial records showing transactions routed through accountants Edward had never opened. Then Margaret Holloway's written statement, dated and signed. Calloway read in silence. Her assistant took notes with the careful speed of someone trained not to react visibly to what they were writing. The room had the specific quiet of people deciding what their reactions were before allowing themselves to have them. Then Calloway looked up. "This signature on the altered contract," she said. "It's not Edward Reeves's. No, it's a forgery. A careful one. Someone studied his signature. But the original is right there for direct comparison." Calloway looked between the 2 documents for a long, unhurried moment. Then she set them both down. With the deliberateness of someone handling something that has just shifted the weight of a case she's been carrying in one direction for 6 years. "How long have you had these?" "The Holloway documents, 48 hours. The underlying evidence I've been building for 4 years." Calloway studied her, Not unkindly, with the assessment of a woman deciding what category this situation belonged in and finding that none of her existing categories fitted cleanly. Why now? Calloway said. Because now I have everything. Simple, true. I needed all of it before I came in. Not most of it. Not enough to make a compelling argument. All of it. Another pause. Longer on. Charlotte Harrington is a woman with significant resources and significant relationships in this city, Calloway said. Each word measured. Yes, Isabella said. And she used those resources to destroy my father. And then she used them again to try to make me disappear. She held Calloway's gaze without blinking. She failed at the second part. Calloway was quiet for a full 30 seconds. Isabella counted them without appearing to count them. Then Calloway picked up the original contract again, looked at it once more, and nodded once, slowly. The nod of a woman who has recalculated and arrived at a new number. I'll need 2 weeks, she said. Independent verification of the documents, a full review of the financial records, a case structure built properly so it holds. She looked at Isabella, and then we move. Isabella exhaled, slow, almost imperceptible. 2 weeks, she said. 14 more days of Charlotte Harrington moving through the world like it was built for her. Fine.
At 4 years, 14 days was nothing.
The days that followed moved strangely.
Not slow, not fast. Strange specific way of time when something large is in motion and you can feel it moving,
but can't yet see where it's going to land. Isabella worked, she built. She prepared for what came after, because there would be an after, and she needed to be ready for it, not just for the event itself, but for the life on the other side of it. She had started thinking about Roof's consulting in concrete terms, not as an idea, as a plan with stages. She pulled out the notes she'd been keeping in fragments for 2 years and began organizing them into something that looked like a structure, a firm, a name on a door. William called every evening, not always about the case. Sometimes about the case. Updates from some. The status of Calloway's verification process, the question of timing for the gala. But sometimes just to talk. He told her things about his day that were occasionally significant and occasionally entirely mundane, and somehow both versions were fine. More than fine, which was a thing she kept almost examining and then steering away from. On the 4th night, she said, "Don't you have more useful things to do at 10 on a Tuesday?" "Probably," he said. And yet, he agreed without apparent concern about the repetition. She sat with that for a moment. "William, Isabella, this is not straightforward," she said. "Careful, whatever comes after. It's not simple. I'm building something from nothing. I have 4 years of gaps in my professional record. I have a family name that still carries damage in certain circles even after everything we're about to do. I know, I'm not someone who fits into the life you have in a clean way. I know what it is," he said, quiet. "Certain, I'm not calling you at 10 on a Tuesday because I think it's uncomplicated." "Then why?" she said, genuinely, not testing, not performing the question, actually asking it. He was quiet for a moment, long enough that she thought he might deflect. "Because the last time I decided something was too complicated and stepped back from it," he said, "I spent 2 years regretting the step, not the complication." A pause. "I'm not doing that again." She didn't answer right away. Outside her window, the city did its nighttime work. All that light and parallel movement. All those lives running alongside each other without touching. "Good night, William," she said. "Good night, Isabella." She set the phone down and sat in the dark for a while. The thing she'd been steering away from was getting harder to steer around. Garrett Phelps appeared at William's office on the Monday of the 2nd week. He brought coffee, 2 cups, which was the signal he used when he wanted to have an actual conversation rather than report on something. He sat down.
Maud, Moxall's Corp.
I drank from his own. "How are you, William?" "I'm fine, Garrett." "You've been on the phone every evening for 2 weeks and you're sleeping 4 hours a night and you're better at your job than you've been in at least a year. Which is the most concerning symptom." Garrett held his cup with both hands. "So I'll ask again, how are you?" William looked at him. 15 years. The man had been counting something from 15 years and had never once used it against him. "I don't know what I'm doing," William said. "Yes, you do," Garrett said simply. "You're just not used to doing it without a plan." William said nothing. Garrett finished his coffee, set the cup down, stood up. "For what's worth," he said at the door, "she's the first person I've seen make you listen instead of talk." He paused. "That's not a small thing." He left. William sat with that for a while. Charlotte made one more move on the 11th day. A lawyer's letter. Hand-delivered to Isabella's office. A threatened defamation suit for statements Isabella had not yet made publicly. A preemptive legal strike, the kind of move that communicated both aggression and anxiety in equal measure. Isabella read it once, set it on the corner of her desk, photographed it for the record, and went back to work. William saw it that evening. She's panicking, he said.
Yes, badly enough to be sloppy. Every move she makes right now is being documented and sent to Kilcoy's office. Isabella looked at him across the desk. 3 more days.
He set the letter down. You're very calm, he said. I'm not calm. She said it without defensiveness. Just accurately. I reorganized every file in this office at 2 a.m. on Tuesday. Alphabetize things that have no logical reason to be alphabetized. He stared at her. That's your version of not calm. I told you I was specific. He laughed, real, unplanned. The kind that arrives before you've decided to happen, and something in that. The realness of it, the absence of calculation, did something to the quality of air in the room. Made it feel like a different kind of space than it had been 30 seconds before. Isabella looked at him, and for one moment didn't look away. 3 more days, she thought. Just 3 more days, and then she could think about what happened after. The Harrington Foundation annual gala, Charlotte's event, had been for 7 years. She had taken it over from the previous chair and made it definitively hers. Name on the program. Her photograph in the lobby. The city's most prominent families gathered annually to be seen being generous, which was a particular form of social theater that Charlotte had always understood and executed better than anyone. Which made it, under the circumstances, the most precisely appropriate location imaginable. Calloway had agreed. The timing was right and the team was in position. Better, she'd said, to let this happen somewhere Charlotte couldn't control the aftermath. Somewhere the people who had built her up could watch what they'd built on. Isabella wore black. Not for drama. Because it was correct for the evening, simple, unadorned, the kind of black that makes no statement beyond the person wearing it. She stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, her actual apartment now, not a hotel room. The small place on Decker Street she'd signed a lease on 3 weeks ago as an act of deliberate forward motion, and looked at herself for a long moment. She looked like her mother sometimes. Not always, but in certain lights, with her hair a certain way. Eleanor was there in the line of her jaw. In the way she lifted her chin slightly when she was deciding something. She thought, I hope you can see this, both of you. Then she picked up her bag and went. The Aldermore ballroom was full. Same chandeliers as the wedding. She noticed them coming in. The way you notice a place you've been before, except that last time she'd been someone strategic, except tonight she was here to see us finish something she'd started 4 years ago in a hospital waiting room with nothing in her pockets. Same chandeliers. Entirely different room. Charlotte stood near the center of it, greeting people, radiant, the perfect hostess in the perfect dress in her perfectly organized world. The face she showed was a masterwork, open, warm, confident without arrogance. Everything positioned. She saw Isabella in. Something crossed her face, fast, controlled, cut of something beneath the surface of the composure. Gone in under a second, Isabella saw it, filed it, kept moving. She made her way through the room without rushing, spoke to people she recognized from the past weeks of re-entering this world, accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray and did not drink it. Renaud found her near the east windows, the same east windows as last time, which felt right like a bookend, and stood close without making the proximity obvious. Ready, he said quietly. Not a question. Nearly. Calloway's team confirmed position 10 minutes ago. Good. He was quiet for a moment. Then, your father would. After, she said softly. Tell me after. He nodded, stepped back. William appeared at her side. She hadn't tracked him entering. But there he was, dark suit, the particular stillness he carried when he was paying full attention to everything and showing nothing. He looked at her and didn't say a word, and that was exactly the right thing. She looked back. Ready, she said without saying it. He gave one small nod. Charlotte moved toward them at precisely the moment Isabella had calculated she would. Because Charlotte Harrington did not let things come to her. She went to them. She controlled the terrain. Isabella. The warmth of it was impeccable. I didn't expect you this evening. I was invited, Isabella said pleasantly, by the foundation board. They've been very welcoming. A flicker, small, controlled, Charlotte Williams' voice. Steady. Perfectly cool, William. She looked who was between them. Hell, I hope you've both been enjoying. Charlotte, Isabella said, and something in her voice made Charlotte stop. It wasn't volume, it wasn't edge, it was weight. The specific, unhurried weight of someone who has been waiting with extraordinary patience for an extraordinary length of time and has decided now that the waiting is over. I think you know why I'm here, Isabella said. Charlotte straightened. Fractionally. I don't know what you. The original Reeves construction contracts, Isabella said. Still pleasant. Still entirely even. The ones you used as templates before you altered them. Margaret Holloway held them for 6 years. She tilted her head very slightly. She gave them up 11 days ago. Charlotte went very still. The room around them continued. Music, conversation, crystal catching light from 700 candles. None of it aware that 3 people near the east windows were standing at the center of something that had been building since 2017. Those documents don't. Charlotte started. Her voice was careful now, precise in a way it hadn't been 30 seconds ago. They show your signature, Isabella said, on the originals before the alterations. And they show my father's signature as it actually looked, which is not the same as the signature on the documents you submitted to the court. A pause. The federal prosecutor's office has had them for 11 days, along with the financial records, the account structures, and Margaret's full written statement. Another pause. Everything. Charlotte looked at William. William. Her voice had lost its warmth entirely now. Stripped down. Real. You can't have. I didn't do anything, he said simply, except not stand in the way. Charlotte looked back at Isabella. And for the first time, across every encounter, every carefully done interaction since a wedding where they'd shaken hands and Isabella had delivered a quiet message, Charlotte Harrington looked afraid, not of what came next in the abstract. Afraid of this room, of these specific people in it, of the fact that the world she had built so carefully around herself was about to become visible for what it actually was. The ballroom doors opened. 2 federal agents, Calloway behind them, slightly to the left, in the background, the way prosecutors position themselves when the work has been done and what remains is procedural. They move through the room with the quiet authority of people who have done this before and have no need to perform it. The room noted. Gradually. Then all at once, Charlotte saw them coming. She looked at Isabella one more time, one last assessment, one last calculations about whether there was a move remaining. You don't understand what she started. I understand exactly what I've done, Isabella said. Soft, not triumphant, just certain. I gave my father his name back. The agents reached them. Charlotte Harrington, professional, level. We have a federal warrant for your arrest. Charges include wire fraud, financial fraud, and falsification of legal documents, connection with the 2019 Reeves construction case, and 2 related matters. He paused the length of a breath. You have the right to remain silent. The ballroom went absolutely still. Every conversation stopped at once, like a conductor had dropped a baton. Every glass paused halfway to somewhere. Every carefully maintained face in Charlotte Harrington's carefully maintained world turned to look. Charlotte said nothing. The handcuffs went on with the quiet efficiency of people who do this without drama. And then she was walked out. Through the ballroom. Past the chandeliers. Past the people who had attended her events for 7 years, eaten her food and thanked her for her generosity. Past the photograph of her in the lobby. Past all of it. The doors closed. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then someone coughed quietly. Someone else murmured to the person next to them. The ordinary sounds of a room deciding to be ordinary again crept back in, carefully, incrementally, the way sound returns after something loud. Isabella stood very still. She had imagined this moment many times over 4 years, in many versions. She had imagined feeling the clean, bright satisfaction for something completed, vindicated, done. What she actually felt was tired, deeply structural tired, the kind that lives in the body rather than the mind. The kind that arrives when something you've been bracing against for so long finally stops, and your body understands all at once how long it's been holding that particular tension. And beneath the tired, grief. Not for Charlotte, never for Charlotte, for the version of the last 6 years that hadn't happened, for her father's last months, for her mother's last year. For the 28-year-old woman stood in the rubble of her family and made herself believe that if she just kept going, if she could just hold the thread, if she could reach the other side, she had reached it. And they weren't here. William put his hand on her shoulder. She didn't move toward him or away. She stood with his hand there and felt the weight of it, real steady, the kind of steady you don't know you've been missing until it exists.
Okay,
He said quietly. She said, not yet. Okay, he said, and kept his hand exactly where it was. Renaud appeared on her other side, didn't speak, just stood there, the three of them facing the room together so the evening reassembled itself around the absence of Charlotte Harrington. Which was, Isabella thought, fuff. For tonight it was enough. She found the letter on a Thursday afternoon. She'd been sorting through a glass box bought from Ruth's small storeroom. Ruth, who had rented her a corner of in a building on Marsh Street for 4 years, who had asked no questions, who had accepted cash, folded in an envelope slipped under her door each month, who had said when Isabella came to collect the last of her things, "I always thought you'd be back for this." Most of the box was documents, evidence, the physical infrastructure of 4 years of work, papers she'd collected, records she'd copied, notes she'd taken in margins and on the backs of envelopes, the material evidence of a life lived sideways to itself. But at the bottom of the box, a manila envelope, her father's handwriting on the front, her name, only her name, and below it, a date. November 14th, 2019, 12 days before he died. She sat down on the floor of her office with the envelope in her hands, there for a while without opening it. Just holding the physical fact of it, he had written her name. He had sealed it. He had put it somewhere she would eventually find it, which meant he had known she would eventually come looking. Which meant he had known her still, even at the end. Even when she hadn't been there, she opened it. The handwriting inside was slightly unsteady. Different from his usual. Letters larger than they should be. The pen pressed harder in certain places. The deliberate care of someone managing something physical that was making the simple act of writing require effort. Isabella, I know you're looking. I know you well enough to know you to stop, and I stopped wanting you to stop about 3 weeks ago when the looking was what was keeping you moving forward. So I stopped praying for you to let it go. But I need to tell you something. We knew by the end what Charlotte was. Not fully. Not with the kind of proof that holds up in a room, but enough. Your mother and I talked about whether to tell you. I wanted to protect you from it. She said you were too strong to need that kind of protecting. She was right. She usually was, about you specifically. Here is the thing I need you to hear. I don't need to be cleared. I don't need my name on a document that says I was right. The people who mattered to me, the people whose opinion of me I actually valued, they know who I was. That's enough for me. It has to be enough, because it's all I have left to work with. What I need from you is different. Don't let the looking be the only thing. Don't spend yourself entirely on my behalf and arrive at with nothing left that belongs to you. The fight is worth fighting. I'm not telling you to stop. I'm telling you to make sure there's something you're building toward, not just something you're moving away from. I want you to have things to lose again, Isabella. That's what I want. Not justice, though I hope you find it. You. A life where something could go wrong because something matters enough to go wrong. Come back to yourself when this is done. All my love always. Dad. She read it once, then again. The third time her hands were not entirely steady. And then, finally, for the first time in 4 years, in the way that is completely different from almost crying, in the way that has no performance in it and no management and nothing held back, she cried. On the floor of her office, with the box and the documents and the afternoon light coming through the window onto the street below, with her father's letter in her hands, with the knowledge that he had known her well enough to write exactly what she needed to hear and to leave it somewhere she would find it after the thing was done. She cried until she didn't. Then she sat there for a while longer, just breathing, letting the room be quiet around her. I want you to have things to lose again. She thought about that for a long time. William found her there an hour later. He had a key. She'd given it to him 2 weeks ago, framed as practicality, neither of them examining the framing too closely. He came in and saw her on the floor and sat down next to her, without hesitating, on the floor, in his good suit, without a word about the suit or the floor or any of it. She showed him the letter without speaking. He read it slowly. She watched his face and saw the moment he reached the part about things to lose. Something in his expression that was not grief and not quite recognition, something that was both at once. He folded the letter with great care and handed it back. He sounds, William said quietly, like someone worth everything you did. He was, she said, They sat there on the floor of her office. No case to discuss. No next step to plan. No Charlotte Harrington or federal prosecutors or documents or any of the apparatus of the last several months. Just the floor in the city's outside and the letter in her hand, and the particular quality of a room in which something has been said that can't be unsaid. I need to build something, she said eventually. I know. Not because of him. Not as tribute. He specifically told me not to do it as tribute. She looked at the wall where the evidence board had been. She'd taken it down the morning after the arrest. Blank wall now, waiting. I need something forward-facing, something that belongs to the next part. Reeves Consulting, he said. She looked at him. You said it once, he said, months ago. I wrote it down. She hadn't known that. The fact of it, that he had been paying that kind of attention, did something specific to the quality of the silence. Reeves Consulting, she said, testing it out loud. Investment analysis, pattern recognition. I know how to find things that are hidden in structures that look clean on the surface. A pause, a small smile, the first one in several hours. I've had considerable practice. You have? He said. She stood up. He stood up. In the middle of her office, and the afternoon light had gone completely and the lamp in the corner was doing most of the work. I'll need investors, she said. I have 2 serious contacts from the Aldermore who reached out after the arrest. I'm meeting with them next week. Good. I'm not asking you for capital. I know. I mean it. I know you mean it, he said. And I know you'll have what you need without me. And I know that matters to you in a specific way that I respect. He held her gaze. I'm not going to try to give you something you've told me you don't want. She looked at him, the man she had assessed on a curb and categorized as useful and complicated. The man who had not pushed when pushing was his instinct, who had sat on the floor of her office in his good suit without mentioning it, who had written down the name of her company months before she'd committed to it. William, she said. Isabella, I'm going to say something without qualifying it. He waited. I'm glad you were the one who almost walked past me, she said. Of everyone who went by that afternoon, I'm glad it was you who came back. He was quiet for a moment. I almost didn't, he said. I know. She held his gaze. But you did. Something settled. Not dramatic. The way things settle when they've been in motion for a long time and finally find position. A click that doesn't make a sound. He reached into his jacket pocket, took out a small box. She looked at it. Then at him. I had 3 different plans for this, he said. One involved a restaurant. Actually, the second one was worse than the first. They both felt like something built for an audience. He held the box without opening it yet. This is not built for an audience. It's built for my office floor, for wherever you actually are, he said, which is where I want to be. He opened the box. The ring was simple. Single, clean lines, nothing excessive. The choice of someone who had been paying close attention for months to exactly the kind of thing this specific person would and would not want. And underneath the ring, folded small, tucked into the corner of the box, a piece of paper. She took the paper first, because of course she did. And he had known she would. He'd put it there, knowing she would reach for the paper before the ring. She unfolded it. It was an official document, heavy letterhead, the language of courts and legal proceedings. She read the first line and her breath stopped. In the matter of Edward James Reeves, formal exoneration and restoration of record, all charges vacated in full. This certificate acknowledges that the late Edward James Reeves was the victim of deliberate and premeditated financial fraud and bears no legal or moral responsibility for the events of 2017 through 2019. She stopped. Her hand went flat on the document, steadying. She read the first line again, then a third time. How, she said. Her voice not entirely her own. Calloway filed the motion the day Charlotte was arrested. Margaret Holloway's full cooperation made it straightforward, and there's an attorney Silas knows who specializes in post-conviction exoneration work. He paused. It was finalized 4 days ago. I've been waiting for the right moment. She stood very still, her father's name, on a document that said what he actually was, what he had always been, what Charlotte had spent years making sure no official record would ever acknowledge, cleared, actually legally, permanently cleared. She held the document for a long time. Not reading it anymore, just holding the weight of it. Then she looked up at William. Yes, she said. I haven't asked yet. Yes. Isabella, I had words, William. She looked at him with everything she had stopped managing. Yes. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. Because he had paid attention. because he had been paying attention since a curve for Thursday afternoon and had never stopped. She held her hand up. The stone caught the lamp. Simple, real, not performing anything. My father wrote that he wanted me to have things to lose again, she said quietly. William looked at her. Then let's make sure you have them, he said. Reeves Consulting opened on a Tuesday morning in late March. 4th floor of a building on Warwick Street. Real windows facing the street. The name. On the door in clean, modest lettering that didn't shout and didn't need to. Reeves Consulting. Isabella stood in the doorway before going in. Just for a moment, she thought about her father's kitchen table. Coffee, going cold in contract, spread in the particular disorder of a working man's focus. The way he used to look up and say, without checking whether she had time, just assuming she did, assuming her opinion was worth having. What do you think about this? She thought about her mother's laugh. Too large for the room she was in, always. She fits about 4 years. Curbs up and disposable phone and careful invisible movements through a world that didn't know she was moving through it. She thought about a parking structure and a letter on an office floor and a ring that fit because someone had been paying attention. She stepped inside. Her assistant Claire, who had sent the most direct cover letter Isabella had ever read. 3 sentences, no preamble. Here is what I can do and here is why you should care. Looked up. Good morning, Miss Reeves. Good morning, Claire. She set down her bag, looked at the wall across from the windows. She'd put something there last week. Not an evidence board. A photograph, black and white, her parents, before she was born, standing outside what would become the first Reeves construction office. Her father in a suit slightly too large for him at the time, before he'd grown into it. Both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Something that'd been funny on an ordinary day, in an ordinary year before any of what came after. She looked at it for a moment. You have a 9 o'clock with the Pemberton Group, Claire said. And flowers came. Flowers on the corner of the desk. A small card. She opened it. To Reeves Consulting, may it be everything it should have been and everything new. D. Holloway. She set the card down next to the flowers. Sat at her desk. Opened her laptop. Pulled up the Pemberton file. Outside the window, Warwick Street went about its morning. People moving with purpose, the ordinary momentum of a city that doesn't pause for significance. The sun came through the clouds briefly, actual sun, in a week that had been mostly gray, and crossed the window and put a line of light across her desk. There and gone in a few seconds. But there, she began. 6 months after the consulting opened, after the Pemberton Group, 2 other investors and a staff of 4 in Trebuchet, it was building the way real things build, through work rather than spectacle. Isabella sat in a doctor's office on a Wednesday afternoon. William sat beside her, his knee touching hers. The contact of something that had become automatic without either of them deciding it would. Dr. Sheridan, who had the man of one who had delivered a great deal of news in both directions and understood that both directions carry weight, looked up from the chart with a particular expression. Well, she said, the word doing a lot of work. And then, twins. The room went quiet. William turned and looked at Isabella, looked at the chart, at the grey position on the screens, at the 2 small and undeniable presences. Both healthy, Dr. Sheridan said. Strong heartbeats. Everything looks exactly as it should. Isabella looked at William. He looked back at her. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Nothing came out. Which was, she would the thing with this ultimately return to her many moments. The only moment she had ever seen William Ashforded with nothing to say. No words prepared, no composure managing the space where words should be. 2, he said finally. 2, she confirmed. At the same time. That is generally how twins work, yes. He looked back at the screen, at the image. Something moved through his face. She didn't try to name it because naming it would have made it smaller than it was. The face of a man who had spent 38 years building things that could be measured, looking at something that couldn't be measured by any instrument he had. He reached over and took her hand. His hand was not steady. She noticed that. Held it. His hand, which had been steady through documents and arrest warrants and a park structure and an office floor, was not steady right now. And that undid something in her that she hadn't known was still held together by effort. She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. My father, she said quietly. Not to William, not to Dr. Sheridan, just into the room, into the air. Would have something to say about this. Something practical, she continued, about planning. about structure and preparation and having the right systems in place. A pause, and then he would have cried and pretended he wasn't crying. And my mother would have laughed at him for it. William made a sound beside her, low, the laugh that comes from somewhere real when something is real. She looked at the screen. 2 small heartbeats. 2 people who didn't have names yet, who didn't have opinions or habits or fears or the specific way they would each hold a spoon. Everything still entirely ahead of them. Everything still entirely possible. I want you to have things to lose again. She had them. She had so many of them now. Her father had been right. He usually had. She'd spent years being too determined to say so, and then she'd come around to it anyway, because the truth has its own weight, and eventually the ground shifts. She was standing on new ground. It was solid. The light in Dr. Sheridan's office was the ordinary light of an ordinary room on an ordinary Wednesday. It wasn't doing anything special. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything that 4 years of walking towards something had been walking toward, without her knowing the shape of it from the inside. She sat in the chair with William's hand in hers and 2 heartbeats on a screen, and her father's letter in her memory and her name on a door on Warwick Street, and the photograph of her parents laughing at something outside the frame. And she thought, here, this is what he meant. This is here.